Hi everyone. Hope you've had a wonderful week in your walk with the Lord. Our journey through Hebrews, the letter to the Hebrews, last week we were looking at chapter 10, where there was a warning and then also a word of encouragement, a call to perseverance. And the writer to the Hebrews ended that chapter by saying, God's righteous ones live by faith. We live by faith. He says we are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed, but of those who believe and are saved. And then he carries on now in chapter 11, talking about that faith, the faith that we live by, the faith by which we believe and are saved. And he defines what saving faith in God is and how it's demonstrated in the believer's life. And the 11th chapter of Hebrews is one of the best known great chapters of the Bible. It's been called the Hall of Fame of the heroes of faith. And here the Hebrew writer focuses on the quality of the faith that we have to have, a saving faith, to have the right relationship with God, and also the quality of faith that we need to grow in our relationship with God, to grow in our walk with the Lord, and to persevere in the Christian life. And so this chapter focuses, it centers on what faith is. And we need clarity on this because there's a lot of confusion on what that word faith means. It tends to be misunderstood. And there are some strange ideas about what faith actually is. And those do not correspond to faith in God. Just to mention a few things of what faith is not. Faith, for example, is not positive thinking. It is not the power of positive thinking. That's something different. Faith is not a hunch or a gut feeling that you follow. Faith is not hoping for the best. Just hoping that everything's going to turn out all right. That's not faith. Faith is not a feeling of optimism either. Being optimistic is good, but that's not what faith is. And faith is not the intellectual acceptance of a doctrine. The doctrine is very true, just the intellectual acceptance of that is not faith. That may be part of what's involved in faith. So faith is none of these things, although all these things have been identified as being faith. So what is faith then? And so as I said, the writer to the Hebrews defines faith, especially in the first 6 verses of this chapter, of chapter 11. Then the rest of the chapter shows us how faith works in the lives of men and women of faith. So I want to just mainly look at the first 6 verses of chapter 11 today. And again, the writer is not discussing faith in general. He's specifically talking about faith in God, the faith that is necessary for saving relationship with God. And so it's really important that we know what faith is. So in these first 6 verses we have a definition of faith, in which the components or the ingredients of faith are given to us. And by the way, this is the only definition of faith I know of in the Bible, where we're told faith is, and then tells us what it is. This is followed by an affirmation of the significance, the implications of this faith in God. And then there are illustrations of faith in the lives of men and women of faith. So I want to read first the verses 1, 2, and 6 of Hebrews chapter 11, so you can see what faith is. And so in verse 1, he says, "Now faith is confidence in what we hope for, and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the people of ancient times were commended for. By faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible." And then verse 6, "And without faith it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists, and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him." Now, you notice how these verses indicate that faith begins with hope. He starts off by saying faith is confidence in what we hope for. And faith starts with a sense of discontent. You can never have much faith unless you're dissatisfied with the way that you are now. And you're longing for something better. Okay, that's the first note of faith, and where faith begins in your life, this feeling of dissatisfaction. You're not happy with how you are, how things are. You know, if you do not feel dissatisfied with the way you are, it's really impossible for you to exercise any faith. That is why all through the Bible, the great enemy of faith is being complacent, having a complacent spirit, an attitude of self-satisfaction with the status quo. You're happy with how you are. You're happy with how things are. You'll never move on to having faith with that attitude. But if you're dissatisfied, if you're looking for something better, if you know there must be something more, something better, if you're not content with merely living out your life by working and eating, sleeping, amusing yourself, and then eventually dying, then you're in a position to exercise faith. You know, there may be many who would like to have faith, but they're not ready for it because they're not dissatisfied with themselves, with life at the moment. They must demand more of life than just the mere mechanics of living. So you want more, don't you? Hopefully you want more than just, you know, the mechanics of living life on this earth. You're looking for something better. That is the first note of faith. That is the beginning of faith. Verse 6 says, anyone who would come to God must believe, must have faith. So that's looking for more out of life than is just on the surface. Okay, not being satisfied with life on the surface, but just the length and breadth of life, but no depth. So to have faith, you would come to God. You want to find something that goes below the surface, to a deeper life, more meaningful life, more significant life. That's necessary for faith. You must come to God seeking more, that deeper life below the surface. And then he says faith is the assurance about what we do not see. Assurance about what we do not see. Okay, it's not only desire for something better, but it's being aware that there is something else. There's more than what we can just see. That's faith. Become aware that we're surrounded by an invisible spiritual kingdom. That which is seen is not, the whole explanation of life here on this earth. There are realities that cannot be seen, cannot be weighed, cannot be measured, cannot be analyzed, cannot be touched, which are as real and vital as anything that we can see and touch. In fact, they may even be more real because they are the explanation, the cause behind the things which can be seen. You must understand there is a spiritual kingdom that exists. The assurance about what we do not see, that's faith. This is so beautifully seen in Jesus' life, in his words, his teachings, his actions. Jesus talked about God the Father as though he were standing right there, although he is invisible, but yet he is present. Jesus speaks of the world as a great family home in which there is a father, with a father's heart, father's love, welcoming us, taking care of us. Jesus did not see the universe as an impersonal machine, grinding along as science so frequently portrays the world. Jesus also talked about the invisible, the very real spiritual world, the spiritual kingdom. And verse 6 says the same. Anyone who comes to God must believe that he exists. Okay, we can't see God, we can't touch God, we can't measure God, of course, but anyone who comes to God must believe that he exists. Some people say, well, that's the hard part. That's what's difficult. Really? Yeah, it's not. It's not. It's not hard at all. In fact, it is very easy to believe that God exists. What does require a lot of effort is to disbelieve. It requires actually very little effort to believe that God exists. We have evidence all around us. The interesting thing is that everyone in the world starts out believing that God exists. As little children, we believe that God exists. It's only when we are carefully trained to disbelieve that we can come to the position of declaring that God does not exist. Life from God is streaming in on every side, and all we need to do is open our eyes to see it and to know that God is there, that God does indeed exist. Children have no problem with this. The concept of God ought to be the hardest thing for little children to grasp, because you cannot see God. But the amazing thing is little children have no difficulty at all in believing that God exists. And as I said, it requires long and careful effort to train the mind to reject the evidence and to explain it, all the evidence, some other way, on other terms. It takes hard work and a lot of faith in yourself and your ideas to be an atheist. Even then, if the atheists aren't careful, they suddenly refer to a belief in God. As the man who on one occasion exclaimed, "Thank God I'm an atheist." Sort of a contradiction there. But there's another ingredient of faith that we've already touched on, that faith is a confidence in what we hope for. Okay, it's a confidence in things that we hope for, the things that you're longing to have, the better man or woman that you would like to be. It will be achieved by believing in God, by acting on the faith that we have in God because of the revelation of things unseen, the revelation that God has given us, the evidence. Faith begins with a longing, as I said earlier, to be something better. Awareness that within the universe there is something else, and that someone else has revealed himself to us, not only in creation, but also in His Word, and especially through His Son, Jesus Christ. If we act on that revelation, we will achieve the things that we hope for the something better for ourselves and our life. That is the story of faith. And it works for everyone. It will work for everyone. Verse 3 tells us an amazing element of faith is also faith in God as the creator of the universe. Verse 3 says, "By faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible." That statement, remember, was made in the first century, when the best scientific minds of that time taught that the ultimate breakdown of matter was fourfold. There were four elements in the world of matter. There was fire, water, soil, and air. That was the explanation of all matter. 2,000 years later, we can talk about atoms and subatomic particles and things like that, but science still studies just the visible material world for the most part. Sometimes they do get into parts that cannot be seen. For the most part, they're examining and studying the physical world. And this verse says that we can never explain the things that are seen till we come to grip with the things that are unseen. Let's recognize the existence of things unseen. A scientist said this several years ago, made this confession. He said, "Through the years I've struggled to gain a greater understanding of electricity and magnetism in order to harness these forces for our use. Even so, I cannot now give a lucid definition of electricity or magnetism, except to say that they are invisible forces that have real, very real manifestations." The Bible told us that a long, long time ago. The truth is that faith puts us in touch with reality. Faith enables us to lay hold of the basic facts of life, the life that God has given us, life on this earth. Faith shows us things as they really are. Faith is believing that there's another dimension to life other than that dimension that can be touched and tasted, seen, felt. There's more to life than that. And there's also the realm of the Spirit, the invisible spiritual kingdom of God. And all the ultimate answers of life lie in that kingdom, not in the physical world that we can see and examine and study. Now, faith believes that God, in His grace, has stepped over that boundary into human history, and revealed to us some great and very valuable facts. If faith believes these facts, the things that God has revealed to us about Himself, about that unseen world, and faith then adjusts its life to those facts, and we live on that basis. The world does not understand, and sometimes uses derogatory terms for those who walk by faith, for those who believe in God. And certainly Christians are called to be different than those who have no faith in God. But though the world does not understand why, those who walk by faith, they actually win the day, because they are in touch with things as they really, really are. That's the glory of faith. So let me summarize what the Hebrew writer says about faith in these first 6 verses. He says the first requirement of faith is to believe that God exists, to believe in God. The second requirement of faith is to seek God, to seek this God who exists. And then thirdly, faith is being sure of something that you have never seen, being certain of the things we do not see and hope for. We are also told, fourthly, that faith pleases God. It's only by faith that we can please God. And then finally, faith requires looking for God's reward for believing and seeking Him. That God rewards those who believe in Him. So the writer of Hebrews then spends the rest of the chapter 11, giving us examples, wonderful examples of great faith. 16 men and women are held up as heroes of faith. And some of those names are quite surprising, by the way. There are several women in that list, and you look at that and go, wow, they are examples of great faith. I never would have thought about that. But then you look at their lives and you understand why. So 16 men and women, heroes of faith, who demonstrate how faith in God is lived out in a way that is pleasing to God, in a way that God rewards. Okay, these Old Testament saints built their lives on the foundation of faith, and they were approved by God. And because they are approved by God, they are examples to us, examples that we need to look at, examples that they're commended to us as examples to follow. The heroes of faith bore witness to their faith by using it to overcome obstacles, to do amazing deeds with God's help, and then to develop their character as they grew closer and closer to God. And by faith they performed some amazing actions. They sustained trials. A lot of them went through very, very difficult trials, and they obtained blessings. And some even realized the fulfillment of God's promises to them. I'm only going to mention the first 4. As I said, there's 16. I'm just going to touch on the first 4 of these examples of faith in God. The first one mentioned was Abel. Abel worshipped in faith and offered God a more pleasing sacrifice in faith. It cost him his life. His brother Cain killed him for it. But his faith still speaks to us today, the Hebrew writer says. Secondly, he mentions Enoch. Enoch walked with God by faith. Walk is a way of saying he lived by faith. And it so pleased God that God took him to be with him forever. Enoch did not pass through physical death. He was walking with God, and God just said, come, you're going to be with me now forever. Noah believed what God told him about the coming flood. There was no evidence that there was going to be a coming flood, but Noah believed what God told him and acted on it. He worked diligently in faith to build the ark. Then the last one I want to mention, the fourth person of faith mentioned in this list, is Abraham. He's one of the greatest examples of faith in the Old Testament. Abraham, the father of faith, the father of the nation of Israel, believed in God and trusted God that God would fulfill his promises, even though he had to wait. He had to wait for some of those promises to be fulfilled. By faith, he dared to venture into the unknown. God called him, told him to leave his country, go to a place God would show him. Abraham, in faith, followed God, ventured into the unknown. He went where God told him to go. He did what God told him to do. Everything God told him to do, Abraham did it. Even when God asked him to sacrifice his son, his one son, his only son, Abraham was willing to do it, trusting in God. So Abraham is a great example of faith in God, and waiting in faith for God to fulfill his promises. Now, true faith is being able to wait for the fulfillment of God's promises, as God will fulfill them in his time, according to his plan. While we are waiting, we must be obedient. And that's what Hebrews 11:8 says about Abraham. By faith, Abraham obeyed. While we wait in faith, we obey God. We do what God has told us to do. You know, God is still calling men and women to live by faith. And if by faith in what God and who God is, and what God has said, we conduct our lives according to that revelation, particularly God's revelation in Jesus Christ, then we too shall someday have our names added to that list of the heroes of faith, the men and women of faith. Men and women who have believed in God and done great things for God, really the only great things that the world has ever really known. So let's live by faith. Let's be encouraged by the examples that we are given of the heroes of faith, the great men and women of faith. We too will be on that list. Amen.